Hi everybody. We're going to start a little bit early since we are already full, which is really nice. Isn't this awesome to see?
Yes!
Yeah. So this is our first secular hub event at this location. And we're actually going to start a tradition. I'm going to look at you for a reason. And we're going to have the speakers that come here to give talks sign, if they're willing, our sign up here. And then over time, we'll have a whole bunch of notable people signatures on our sign. So if you wouldn't mind.
Just don't use on your checks.
So we'll try to keep this tradition going, and hopefully over the next year we have. So I thought I'd start this off with a quote from Darwin, since it's Darwin's Day. And this is from The Descent of Man, and he's trying to explain how similar our races are with kind of the primates. And he has a quote in here that says, "An American monkey, an Achilles, after getting drunk on brandy, would never touch it again, and thus was wiser than men." And he thought that was a bit of the proof that showed partly how similar our chemistries were, but also that something like a monkey could recognize the impact of liquor and change their behavior based on that. So it was one of his big findings, and I thought the quote was rather applicable. So first, we'd like to welcome you. I think Richard did a talk about the parking. Does everybody know where they can park at this point?
You might reiterate the few spaces in back.
Right, so we really have parking on the street here, there's a line over here. There's a parking lot next door over here. There's one set of parking lots right outside the back that we're not supposed to park at. And that's because above us is apartments, and those belong to the people that live in the apartments. So if you're parked right behind here, right outside the building, it would be nice if you moved your car. We also have parking across the street at the Exto facility. We can use that parking as well. So there's a lot of parking around here. And I think Richard, or Charlie eventually will talk a little bit more about the building, but I wanted to make sure that the parking was covered. I also wanted to introduce the board members, since not all of you are aware of them, although we all have these gorgeous yellow shirts. So, Richard, Kimberly, Becky, on this side, Dave over here, Greg, you're not wearing your shirt. Greg is in the kitchen, and Charlie was our president. And so if you have any questions or want to know anything about the hub, feel free to ask any of us in these yellow shirts. We're very easy to find. I wanted to ask Dave to come up and talk for a few minutes, share some of the things that we're doing online. Give you a chance to share with everybody.
Welcome, everybody. I just wanted to give a quick update on some of the electronic and media areas that we've drawn a lot of attention through the Facebook page, actually. Thanks, everybody, for going out and liking us on Facebook. We've got about 270 likes, and we're just opening today, so that's fantastic. You know, we're still growing at about 9 or 10 a day. So anybody who hasn't gone out and liked us on Facebook, please go out there and do that. We have high-speed internet here, so anybody who needs to get online, it's available for anybody. You should recognize the ID. I think it's the hub, and the password is heathens. So should resonate with everybody pretty well. So that shouldn't be hard to remember. So we have a website coming. There's a lot of content that Facebook just doesn't handle very well. It doesn't handle scheduling of events very well. Can you guys hear me okay? Mm-hmm. I don't even need this, probably. You know, the donations, that type of thing, you know, we want to make that easy, and that's the first, the next step basically with the webpage is to get it to the point where we can take donations and we can schedule, and it'll be a good resource for everybody to go out and see what we have on the website. Meetup has been a fantastic way for us to get, you know, the word out and to schedule things, but it is kind of awkward that we're posting the same thing in multiple meetup groups and people who are assigned to multiple meetup groups. So we're debating whether we get our own or not. But I just wanted to reach out and thank people. It's heartwarming to know that so many people use Facebook and go out and answer questions. Jeanette's been answering people's questions. Laura's been answering people's questions. Where do we park? What's the snacks? That type of thing. It kind of amuses me that people judge whether they're going to come to an event based on what snacks are going to be there. But to each his own. To each his own. Another thing is, we've got temporary projectors and things now. We've got high ambitions of having ceiling-mounted projectors and multiple screens and ways that we can show movies here and show, presenters better. Presenters tend to have tiny details on their slides sometimes, and it's difficult to see them. So that's certainly something we're looking into and we should have soon. So the last thing I wanted to say was, some of the things that we want to really focus on here are what you all can bring to the table. So there's
Nice.
The president.
Everybody, Dave hates the lights in this place, so I think that was really funny to pull off.
It's like an office building. So, what you guys can bring to the table, please come up and talk to one of us about it. Yvonne's got a passion for hiking. There's a great synergy there to organize hikes. Maybe we have a pancake breakfast and then a hike or something like that on a regular basis. Book clubs. Somebody suggested that they wanted to teach a yoga class. There's a lot of IT professionals in this group, so maybe we organize a way to go help the community with a geek squad. There's all kinds of interesting ideas. So basically that's all I wanted to say is bring us your ideas, like us on Facebook, and look for the website coming up soon. Heathens.
If you guys can't hear me, there's something wrong with your hearing because my voice goes everywhere. So it's a little bit of a segue there. Obviously, this place isn't going to exist if we don't continue our income. So if you haven't yet, please at some point tonight, go and make sure you become a member of the Secretary Club. It's only $30 a year. We're not really asking for very much. It's like the cost of a reasonable dinner out. And that's a yearly membership, and that will help us continue to fund this. It's not going to fund itself, of course. That and concessions that we will improve on over time. We're experimenting right now, but feel free to grab some of those if you need them, and book sales as well. Obviously, eventually we will have alcohol sales, but that takes some time. It's actually about a 6 to 8 month process to go through. So eventually we'll have that as well, and I think then all our problems will be solved. Yeah. The only other thing I was going to mention is just how much our volunteer work to get this building in shape for tonight, how much happened. So if you look around you, this was a Obama campaign facility for a while before we started. So there were slogans, of course, on the wall. We painted all the walls. The inner door that you see, the purple one here, was not there. It was just an opening. So we actually framed in and put the whole door in there. The window to the office that we're eventually going to have our sign-ins instead of out here, we'll have them in there. That window wasn't there at all, so we opened it up and put it in there. If you notice, there's surveillance cameras around. They actually go out the back, and eventually we will at the front too, partly to make sure that you guys feel safe with your stuff around here, and if anything happens out there, we have everything on film. So a lot of cleanup has happened. The blinds over the windows, the awning over this. We still have a lot more to do, of course, but a lot went into kind of preparing this and making it a facility that we can use and be proud of.
Sean spent a lot of time here with a lot of power tools.
So yeah, I do a lot of home remodeling on the side, so it was easy enough to do. So now I'd like to bring Charlie up to talk a little bit about the organization as well, and he's our president.
I'm going to use the microphone. It is great to see you all here. As Sean said, we wondered whether you folks would be able to find us, and it looks like we didn't need to worry. That's a good thing. I look out at the crowd. I think we're a little Y chromosome heavy. I'm hoping we'll get more women here as time goes on. You may or may not find it interesting to know that As recently as 10 years ago, I was on the elder board of a large evangelical church here in Denver. And here I am standing in front of you. My worldview changed about 8 years ago. And, I'm sorry? Yeah, it was a little late. I'm sorry. I apologize for being so slow. I'm glad it changed. It's a wonderful new world, and I enjoy it so much more with my secular outlook. But coming from churches, churches have got a lot of things wrong. We all know that. But a few things that they do have right, and I mentioned this the other night, is a sense of community, a sense of connectedness, and a sense of caring. Those three things. And those are three things that I think we have a really hard time with in the atheist secular community. So our hope with the Secular Hub is to maybe bring some of that to our community. I found when I got into this new world, it was I mentioned to somebody a little while ago, it's a virtual world. I mean, well, I wanted to say thank God for that. Thank goodness. You should read an article by Daniel Dennett on goodness. He says we need to thank goodness because goodness is what makes the world work. It's not God. But thank goodness for the internet because that's what has helped us all connect. And that's why a lot of you are here tonight. I was amazed. Can I see a show of hands of how many people, first time you've been to an atheist secular event like this? Here in the city. Wow! I mean, that is, I think that is huge, and that's what we hope to have here is a place that the secular community can call home. It's kind of a small home right now, but a place where we can meet, where you can call, where you can get emails from about different things that are happening in the community. Just to give you a little history, about 1.5 years ago, I got together with some people from some of the different groups here, the HOC, Humanists of Colorado groups, the DAFT group, Atheist Meetup group, and we started to talk about the possibility of having our own place. As to the best of my knowledge, it really has never been done anywhere. And now I know why. It wasn't particularly easy. But we decided if we were going to make that happen, that we needed to have a broad base. It wasn't just going to be one person with deep pockets that was going to fund it or whatever. So we set a goal that we would have to come up with at least 20 people who would put in $1,000 each. And those of you who have been in the community kind of know this story. But we put the word out, and amazingly, it didn't take us very long. And we came up with 21 people who were willing to put up $1,000 each to make a commitment for seed money to make this happen. And we had a launch party in October. And those 21 people attended the launch party. They put a check or credit card in the credit card receipt in the hat. And beginning in October, we started to look for a place. But we have a number of those founders here tonight, and I'd just like to ask the founders, would you all please stand up? Because we owe them a real debt of gratitude. For making that happen. So we started looking for a place. We wanted a central location. We wanted a location that was fairly easy access. We wanted a place that was cheap. And we found it. One of the primary reasons we took this is because we have an amazing lease rate. But access is really good. Just a block south is the terminus for the light rail. So if some of you want to come light rail, you can get within a block. We have to work on this light switch situation. Don't worry, buddy. I just did it myself a little while ago.
I don't like the lights either.
And if you want to go north, if you're coming in from the north, the best way to get is off of I-70. You take Washington, come right in this Google world. I probably don't need to tell you this, but if you live out east, you come MLK, comes right in. If you live south, you come Downing. We liked it because we have a lot of parking around here. That wasn't an easy thing to find. And we liked it because we have up front, we have an office area. The other room that's a little larger is a conference area. We hope to use that for group meetings. We have a recovering from religion group that's going to meet in there. And we have some other groups that hope to meet in there. And then we have a kitchen. We have a Humanists of Colorado group that meet here. Every month they have a potluck. So that works well for them, and we also wanted something that we could serve snacks out of. We wanted this hub to be kind of 4 things. We wanted it to be a meeting place, which is why we're here tonight. We wanted it to be a safe place, a place where people who are leaving religion can come and feel comfortable, talk with other people about their ideas and what it's like to happen. I'm going to let Kimberly talk to this next aspect, but it's community service. And then lastly, we wanted it to be a place where we could socially get together. Some of you may have been here, you probably saw it on the internet, but Friday night we had an event right across the street at a place called Expo Event Center. We had a big crowd there for that. And we had drinks, we had music, not a lot of people dancing, but it's there. We hope to maybe have some monthly events over there that are more socially geared rather than just talking. They talked earlier about membership, and all I can say is we need your help. We need this to be a membership-driven organization. It's only $30 a year. The second thing is we would love for you to donate. There's 3 different ways you can donate if you want to. And the first one is to give us a check to the Secular Hub. Secondly, you can go to online. Atheists for Humanity is an organization that Eric may talk to you about real quickly. And you can link us there. On Facebook, you can also make a donation. Unfortunately, I can't convince you to tithe donation and tell you all the good things that will happen to you. All I can say is it would be a great thing to help the secular community if, number 1, you would become a member, and number 2, you would donate. The other thing that I'd like to ask is we need volunteers to make this happen. We have 7 board members, but the board members can't do everything. And on the membership form, there's a place where you can put there what you can do to volunteer. Anything you can do to make this work. I mean, we would love to have that door open every day, all day, and then events here at night, but we can't do it unless we have people that are here to staff it. So, you know, we need to work on that. I need to tell you this is a work in progress. First night, we're not sure how this is going to work, but it's only going to work if you all help us make it work, and spread the word that the hub's here. We've got here Secular Hub, and it says bringing people together, which is what we're doing tonight, and doing good things. Those are the 2 things we hope to do with the hub. Our logo here, we have the hub, and then we have these dots around, and those dots are to signify people that come to the hub, and also groups, different groups that come to the hub. And Richard's going to talk briefly about that. Kimberly, would you like to come up and talk about community service? Thank you for giving us, because we wanted to give you all kind of an introduction into the hub. Our speaker, James DeGregori, was very kind to say he'd hold off for a minute and let us tell you all about the hub, because for a lot of you, you know, well, for all of you, first meeting, we're not all sure what's going to be happening here.
Great. Yeah, I'll keep it brief too, because I definitely want to get to our main presentation for the night. But as has been mentioned, this is our place, and it really is kind of the first of its kind. I know that a lot of us have felt like we didn't have a home, and now we do, and we get to do what we want here. So we're really open to ideas, and I've had several, and a lot of them have already been voiced, but you know, please come to us with us, because we've been thinking about things like, you know, there's groups for helping people deal with addiction, and a lot of them have this whole higher power thing that really does not work for people like us. There are secular ways of doing that, and this is the kind of place that could be a meeting place for that. I also want to see us be able to build our community and support one another. People who are just coming out of religion, that's a real difficult transition. And we can have groups here that will meet and talk about it, and you can talk to people who really understand where you're coming from. Grief is another one that comes up a lot. You know, a lot of people turn to religion in dealing with grief, and we're human. We're all going to have to deal with it. My hope is that as a community, we'll be there to support one another and get that figured out. And we haven't had that all the time, so I'm really hoping this place will serve as an anchor for that. But I also want to have some fun too. We can do all sorts of groups. Dave mentioned having pancake breakfast, flying spaghetti monster dinner nights. Those sound like fun. The spaghetti cannot fly because I'm not cleaning it up then. But we can have fun with stuff like that and take it again as a launching pad for going out, having breakfast together, and then going out and cleaning up a park or doing any kind of activities like that to give back to the community so people can really know that we are good people, we are part of this community, and we want to do our part. I'm also hoping we'll do stuff like movie nights, and I mentioned this the other night and a lot of people liked it. I have been saving rewatching Firefly, because I want to watch it with a bunch of secular people, because if you haven't watched it, I kind of almost guarantee you'd love it, and I know there's probably already a lot of fans here, so we can set up a TV or the screen and get to watch, be shiny. Yeah, there's all those kind of ideas and more. We want to hear more ideas, so please bring them to us, and I hope you'll find that this is your place and our place, and that we can build a real community here. So thanks for being here.
Richard just asked me to say something as far as groups. We have obviously, we want this to be a place where individuals in Denver come, but we also want it to be a place where groups come. And so the Atheist Meetup, we hope they will be here. The next Freedom from Religion Foundation meeting, which is just beginning, is going to be here. The Boulder Atheist Group want to come in here and have an event. I'm trying to think of the other one. I'm sorry? Humanists of Colorado, there you go. Humanists of Colorado are going to meet here monthly. So we want this to be an organization that will house and bring people together individually and also as groups. Becky over here is helping with set up entertainment. We hope in April we have a secular artist from Australia who was at the Reason Rally, is going to be here in April. And we're just finalizing getting her here. So that's something we hope to have. Secular people have a tendency to just talk a lot. And we hope we'll have to bring a lot of entertainment into that too. Kimberly, can you introduce our speaker for tonight?
Sure. Yeah, we'll get I'll get off the stage. You want to set up the screen again? So, as you know, it is Darwin Day, and in light of that, we definitely wanted to talk about evolution. It is one of those topics that we secularists do not seem to be able to get enough of, and I think there's a lot of reasons for that personally. I think it does kind of really demonstrate that understanding of life and how we all fit together, and I think there's a lot of awe in that. And so, our speaker tonight is Dr. James DeGregori, who is the leader of the Colorado Evolution Response Team. And I'm sure he'll speak about this some more. But my understanding of the, you might just want to move your panel. Oh. So whenever the creationists or people evolution is obviously such a big discussion point in this country, and it should be that we should all be studying it more. But unfortunately, we have this controversy of whether or not it should be taught, which is ridiculous. So when threats to that happen in the schools, CERT steps up and gets people together and starts the process of basically combating those kind of actions. And I will just kind of turn it straight over because I do want, there's more to it than that, I know that. But I know we're going to talk about what evolution means, how it impacts the education system, and how it's important. So, happy Darwin Day, and here is Dr. James DeGregori.
Thanks a lot. It's a real honor to be the first speaker here. So, to give you a little background on CERT, I actually started together with a couple of other colleagues at the university. I think it was 6, 7, maybe more years ago. But it was actually in part because Sean Carroll, I don't know if you guys know who Sean Carroll is, he's an evolutionary biologist. He had come and given a talk, and it was something I'd been thinking about doing for a long time, but he really inspired me to do it. And So if you want to join, we started out just as scientists, and then we opened it up to teachers, and pretty much now we've opened it up to anyone. Essentially, mostly what it is, it's an email list. And so when something that's relevant happens, and we try to both be, we both oppose, those who try to put creationism into schools, but we also try to be proactive. And so if there's events like this, if there's, celebratory things about evolution, we promote those as well. So we do the both positive and the negative, and essentially it's an email group is mostly what it is. But just drop me an email. You can either just send it right to me. You can also find it on the CERT webpage. If you just Google CERT and evolution, you will find us. So I'll start with that, and I'm going to get on this side so that I can advance the slides without getting blinded every time.
Do you mind if we turn the lights
Down?
It'll look dark for just a few seconds, but it's not bad.
Okay. And please interrupt me throughout. This shouldn't be the traditional sort of lecture. And if anyone starts falling asleep, I'll call you out. So the question really is, why evolution matters. And of course, this is really preaching to the choir in some ways, but can you guys see, or am I standing in the way of the slides? So obviously, it's incredibly important for medicine, agriculture, other fields, and I'll get into that a little bit more. And I think, we also need to really be pushing this from that perspective, that why a rigorous scientific education is essential for our nation and for the world. And I think if we push it more, not just from the perspective, well, it's true, but that it's really important, I think we're going to get a more receptive audience. And I'm going to go into a little bit of what I think is the best strategy for countering creationism and ID. And I'm also going to go further into why we must oppose pseudoscience in general. And I think this isn't just coming from the right. Now, maybe people with political power who are opposing science tend to be more on the right, but there's actually a lot of anti-science in this country that comes from the left side as well, and we have to be consistent, at least in my opinion. And finally, I'm going to go into our own studies that I think give a good example of how a better understanding of evolution can really shape our understanding of modern medicine and biology. And so we've been trying to understand how cancer shapes evolution and how evolution also shapes cancer. As I dart past this gentleman to continue. Okay, so the first piece of advice I give is know your audience. And most of these are just, I very purposely picked very stereotypical pictures from Google Images, except for this guy who's actually in my lab. And he's your stereotypical Rastafarian Ethiopian research scientist. But, I think this is important. So if you're talking to the conservative, I think you're going to make a very different argument about why evolution is important. I think you might want to stress, the economic importance, the importance of freedom of thought, and so forth. And if you're talking to a teacher, I think you'd give a different argument than if you're talking to a soccer mom or this guy.
Amendment 64.
So why does it matter? And this is, I think, definitely an argument that resonates much better. And I find that instead of immediately launching into why it's true, if you convince people it matters, that's a much better way to start off. And so I think it's really important that a thorough scientific education is essential for American competitiveness. We need to stress that the world is becoming increasingly science and technology dominated. The countries that are going to dominate the future are the ones that are going to be best able to take advantage of this. And I also like to stress that discovering the unknown is very American. It's the very essence of our pioneer spirit. And that we really can't be restricted in the search for new knowledge. And finally, if we neglect to teach evolution because some oppose it on religious ground, it sets a really bad precedent. Essentially, this means that anything can be fair game to be opposed simply because of someone's religious views or because it upsets someone for some reason. And I think we want to stress that it's important. We want to know, where do we and other life forms come from? It's incredibly important for agriculture. And actually, the example I like to think about best is integrated pest management, which is a great way of taking advantage of understanding of evolutionary dynamics. Are you going to be the forward guy? To basically to reduce the amount of pesticides that get used in the field, but at the same time give better control. Essentially, integrated pest management is the idea that you don't actually try to completely eliminate the pest, because if you try to completely eliminate the pest, you just select for resistance. And so by basically controlling it, even having part of the crops that you basically are sacrificial lambs for the pest, you can actually prevent the spread of the resistance through the pest and actually better manage your crop. For species conservation, it's essential. We've really learned how in medicine, such as with HIV, that understanding the evolutionary dynamics can really help control the disease. And basically, you know, the triple drug combination has allowed us to prevent the resistance from developing in people. Cancer, understanding everything from childhood leukemia to why we get more cancer with age. Therapeutic resistance, I'll get into that a little more later. And things like obesity, you know, why do we crave sugars and fats? Well, because back when food was much more limiting, that was a good thing. We evolved this, it was an adaptive advantage to crave sugars and fats because it provided you with a survival advantage. So go for the next one. So we must be, whoops, you skipped one. I think that's the one, yeah. So we really need to be proactive. I think we can't just wait till there's a school board member that seems to be opposing teaching evolution. Because I think right now the real problem is that it's being diluted in our schools. So we need to not just act when intelligent design legislation or changes in the school board are introduced, but we need to be pushing teachers, administrators, legislators, and school boards to increase the emphasis of evolutionary ideas in school, because it really is the cornerstone of understanding of biology. Oh, before I forget, I should mention that if you really want to have some great resources for why evolution is important, and also polls and everything else, the NCSE website, which is ncse.com, and they've got tons of literature over there, is a fantastic resource for that. Berkeley also has a wonderful evolution-based educational website.
What's NCSE?
National Center for Science Education. And I think you should be paying attention to your kids' biology textbook, to state science standards. Often these state science standards come and go and no one even knows that they happen, but they're definitely something we should be looking out for, and to what's on standardized tests. Can you go to the next one? So what about intelligent design? How do you talk to a family member, friend, or coworker who supports intelligent design? And this is, I think, where it gets really touchy. So I think the first thing you have to do is avoid insulting them or their religion. Because I think if you do that, you've lost the battle right then and there. And you certainly don't question their intelligence. And I know that can be difficult when someone says something that seems really stupid, but you're not going to help yourself out, you're not going to help out the cause. And actually, this is why I tend to be much more of a pragmatist. I think if you present to people, let's say someone is religious, but they're sort of on the fence about whether evolution could possibly happen. If you present it to them that it's either evolution or their God, they're going to pick their God. And so this can be difficult because actually, someone even like myself, I may not feel, at least to me, what I understand about biology and evolution is compatible with a higher supernatural being. But that's my choice, and so I try to basically, from their perspective, understand that, well, they may feel that if it's compatible to them, I'm gonna basically not try to argue that point. I'm gonna try to find as much common ground as I can and not sweat the details that would become to religion. Because I think if we do that, we're gonna lose. And I think there's actually a lot of room for hope. Actually, a poll just came out today that I read in the Huffington Post. It came from MIT, and if I remember right, it was that when they actually polled people about what religion they were, what church they belonged to, so we all know that about 46% of Americans basically believe in a young Earth, 6,000-year-old Earth, and that every life was created as it is today. But according to this poll, at least, and I think it needs to be validated, but only about 11% of people actually belong to a church that would state that they must believe that there is no evolution, there is no Big Bang, and that the Earth is only 6,000 years old. That seems a little low in my book, but that's at least what they're saying. So what I'm hoping is that that a lot of this 46% haven't really given it too much thought. And that it's more of a lack of understanding than it really is a hard and set belief that this has to be true. So there may be room for reducing that number some. So what about teaching the controversy? And this is always, I think, it's a great strategy because it really kind of hits at that American value of fairness. You know, why not teach both sides? But the real issue is that there's no dispute in science over whether evolution happens and happens And there are real controversies within evolutionary biology that can be taught at higher levels. So it's not like we shouldn't be teaching controversies, but we shouldn't be teaching controversies that don't exist. And the way I like to put it, again, this is appealing to that conservative guy in the picture earlier. There shouldn't be an affirmative action for some unsubstantiated ideas. And so, you know, if a conservative is telling you, well, shouldn't we teach it just to be, you know, be fair, then you could say, okay, should we be teaching homeopathy in med school? Should we teach that the Holocaust never happened? There are tons of people that believe it, even though it's absolutely proven to be wrong. But, you know, if you want to just say, if fairness is teaching something that a lot of people believe, there are a lot of other stuff out there that we would have to be teaching in the schools. And so if you present it to someone that way, I think they tend to come around a little faster. I think we can also argue that presenting ID in schools would damage science education. For starters, intelligent design is a curiosity killer. If you have the answers, why continue asking questions? And again, I would argue that would be incredibly un-American. It's not testable, and it surrenders the unknown to the supernatural. It would be sort of like if we submitted a paper and the reviewers came back and said, you know, you didn't show that A really goes to B. And we go, well, that's the magical part. You know, it wouldn't quite fly. And I think that's essentially what they're doing, is they're surrendering the unknown to a supernatural. And if you've done that, then there's no need to look further. It doesn't provide explanations that are useful for medicine, agriculture, etc. And of course, it violates the Constitution. And so I think you can use these arguments, depending on your audience, to, you know, before you even go into the evidence. Again, it gets really difficult. If you just start going into the evidence, they're going to start spouting their counter-evidence, which may be all false, but it's just going to become a he said, she said sort of situation. I would challenge ID supporters to explain things. Instead of always being on the defensive, I like to actually start by asking them questions. So the first thing I want to establish is how old they think the Earth is, because that already sets things in motion to explain a lot. But then I asked them to explain things, and so I described the ice fish of Antarctica. How many people have heard of these ice fish of Antarctica? Yeah, oh, that's right, because I linked you the book. It's actually one of Sean Carroll's books, and I highly recommend his books. Not because they're actually not going into, they spend very little time on why evolution is important, but one, they're just great reads. They're just a lot of fun. He goes into a lot of naturalist examples. What was the name of that book, Eric?
Endless Forms Most Beautiful.
That's a great one too, but this is the more recent one. It's
Remarkable Creatures.
yes. No, that's another one. But it's more about adaptation. But he goes into the ice fish as an example. So the Antarctic ice fish basically no longer use hemoglobin because it's basically not functional at these low temperatures in the Antarctic. And so they have their globin gene still, but they're riddled with stop codons. Basically because it falls under the use it or lose it category for a gene. So the gene basically, since there was no adaptive advantage to having it, it's going to just accumulate damage with time. And so you now have these genes that in almost all other vertebrates, at least I know of on Earth, use this to carry oxygen. They have the same gene, but it's useless because it's basically interrupted. It doesn't make a functional protein. And so they've come up with other means to carry oxygen. And then partly this is facilitated because of the very low temperatures, and so basically, I won't go into that. But so you can ask someone to explain why would it be, if this was a designed creature, why would you put genes in there for the oxygen carrying capacity, but then put a bunch of stops in it so that it didn't function? That's the other explanation. Right?
Last Friday.
So I think that's a great one to go with. And you can also ask them, like, why do we share, you know, our genes with opossums, or for that matter, you know, with iguanas and most other things. In fact, we share a good third of our genes with, at least a third of our genes with even yeast. So, you know, we obviously have a common genetic origin, and just coming up with the explanation, well, it's, you know, it's the way God did it, really doesn't satisfy the, you know, can't really provide an explanation. Oh, one more. The other one I think is really cool is, why is our genome half a virus origin? And actually the estimates are now putting it up above 70%. But basically a good chunk of our genome is actually derived from ancestral viruses. A lot of these are viruses that never actually leave the cell, but basically they reproduce within our cells and keep inserting more DNA. So this is what a lot of people used to call the junk DNA within the genome. But it's really exciting because actually we've been evolving so long with these viruses that a lot of this virus sequence is now being used. So for example, the whole function of the placenta is dependent on some of these viral sequences. And a lot of other basic cellular functions now use viral sequences. Yeah?
Quick question. Is that that viral study, is that done by Craig Ventnor? They're getting a lot of information from that, from his going around the ocean and picking up a lot of the DNA sequences out of the oceans?
They're understanding a lot of the diversity within the world, and that's wonderful. That's actually a little different. This is a lot from these human genome sequencing projects and comparative biology. But we've actually known a lot of these viral sequences for many decades now, actually. But we're now starting to appreciate, because we can now have a better ability to look at something that's quite degenerate and still know that it came from it. So our ability to analyze the genome has greatly increased the fraction of the genome that we now know is viral. But the cool thing is basically even what makes us human may in part be, and for example, there's now evidence that what makes the difference between marsupials and other placental mammals is now because of the basically acquiring some of these viral sequences and using them for our own, not our own, for the species' own purposes. All right, yes?
On the challenging ID supporters, part of the problem is the challenges aren't even. Trying to explain why Adam and Eve don't have belly buttons or shouldn't have belly buttons versus viral origins of genomes. I mean, it's kind of hard to pair those together.
Yeah, I think I think you've got to get someone excited about. I mean, for example, that's where I like the ice fish. Is you can start to describe the ice fish to them and say, look, and it doesn't use hemoglobin, and doesn't use the basic mechanisms that carry oxygen, and yet it's and so it's true. It might, if someone has zero understanding of biology, that's probably not going to work on it.
Right. And for them to validate, is the Earth 6,000 years old? They go to church.
Right.
To have it validated if the ice fish has no hemoglobin,
right. You're going up against a certainty in some cases. And in some cases, I'd argue that if someone is that certain, then they may not be the right audience. I think you often try to make your argument. So when I mentioned the 46%, and there's probably some percentage of that you're never going to convince it. I don't care what you ever say. Darwin could come back from his grave and explain it all, and it's not going to work. Actually, that would provide evidence. But I think there's a certain fraction that you're never going to convince, and you probably don't want to waste too much breath with them. It's always the ones in the middle that you should be going for. So in some ways, it's just like the campaign. Romney wasn't going to try to convince that left-wing hippie, and Obama probably wasn't going to make much headway with a right-wing conservative Christian. And they probably weren't even trying to. So there's two things you want to do. One, you want to mobilize your supporters. And that's, I think, something that we can all do. Those people that sort of think, yeah, I believe in evolution, but does it really matter that much? Are they going to be the ones that show up for a school board election? Things like that. So that's one group you can go for. And the other ones, I think there's just a lot of people in the middle who just really haven't given it too much thought. And I know I've actually, I can say I've converted some. I don't know if I'd call them creationists, but they certainly thought intelligent design had some worth. They really hadn't heard anything to counter it. And they were actually pretty liberal people otherwise. But I think until we start putting it out there, it's really, we don't really know how far we can take this. All right? All right, so, and of course, as I mentioned before, anti-science is not just for the right wing. And I actually am a believer that left-wing lunacy should also be challenged. And so some of this would be, and there may be people in this audience that believe this, but the anti-vaccine hype. I don't know if you've heard this, but basically a lot of people, in fact, quite a few people in Colorado, would claim that the vaccines cause autism. Incredible number of scientific studies have shown this is not the case, but it's still pushed, and it's actually led to a lot of outbreaks of like whooping cough and other diseases that have previously been controlled. And this is another example of, it's funny because they're using the same playbook. They attack the scientist, and they try to present their own science even though their own science lacks merit. Anti-genetic modification. This is another example. Greenpeace pushes this heavily. And someone can personally believe that they don't think genes should be put into plants, but they shouldn't bring up science that doesn't exist to try to oppose it. Organic versus conventional agriculture. I think a lot of people, if you ask them which is healthier for you, they would say organic is. Believe it or not, the evidence isn't so clear. A lot of studies have been done and they're about equal. Bottom line, eat more veggies and don't worry about it. But and again, if someone wants to eat organic agriculture because they think it's better or because they think it's a better way to grow food, great. But just don't distort the science in backing up the claims is the only thing I'd like to say. And actually, in my opinion, it depends on the crop. Actually, some crops, the organic's probably better for the earth. Other crops, conventional is probably better. In fact, GMOs can be better in some cases. And I won't go into that in detail, but anyone have any questions on that? Yes.
Yeah, I'm still waiting for studies that do a more complete analysis considering the micronutrients that are very likely missing in more conventional agriculture.
Well, they actually have looked at quite a few of them, and there's variability, and there's been some big meta-analyses done where they've done it over a lot of studies. Now, you can't look at everything, but there hasn't been clear evidence either one way or the other. So, I mean, I'm not saying that it's a settled debate, but right now there isn't good science either way. I mean, there are actually some crops that actually have more carcinogens when they're grown organically, because the crop actually is more likely to be damaged by bugs. Crops that are damaged by bugs actually produce defenses. Some of those defenses can include carcinogenic compounds. Now, does that mean the organic isn't as good for you? I don't know. It doesn't really say. But if you actually look at little micronutrients and stuff, you can probably make an argument any way you want, depending on which one you look at. And so I think right now there's been a lot of selective presentation of facts. But bottom line is that most people should understand that eating more vegetables is good for you, and you probably shouldn't sweat which one you're eating, because I'm not sure there's good evidence either way.
Yeah. So you're not saying that the amount of debate going on between evolution and intelligent design is similar to the amount of debate going on between
no, it's not quite the same level, but I'm not saying, I wouldn't be convinced that it's not having big ramifications. For example, right now they've developed this rice that can basically make more vitamin A. And they've been trying to distribute this, and it's being heavily blocked by groups like Greenpeace. So this is vitamin A deficiency causes, I think, tens to hundreds of thousands of blindnesses and deaths per year in the third world. And it's being blocked by these groups, and it's being blocked not based on good science. Now, if it's being blocked based on good science or based on good reasons, I could understand it a little more. So actually, I think the repercussions can be quite large. The repercussions within this country may not be as big, but they can be very big in the third world.
Repercussions, but clarity of the argument. In other words, if I were to say to you, oh, there's organic versus conventional ag, is that similar in the amount of science on each side and so on to creationism versus intelligent design? What would you say?
I think creationism versus intelligent design is simple because there's zero evidence on the intelligent design. But if you look at the GMO debate and ask what about major scientific organizations, and just as many major scientific organizations like National Academy of Science and so forth, and national academies from all over the world, have endorsed genetic modification technology, as have endorsed evolution. So I think in terms of where does the science lie, the science is pretty one-sided. But it's hard to compare to evolution because evolution has an unbelievable amount of evidence. It has, a century and a half of studies. My point. Yep. Anything else? All right. Now, any more questions or complaints?
Actually, I have one.
Yeah.
Going back a slide, though, you said at the top of your slide, don't insult people, don't insult their intelligence, their religion, it doesn't get you anywhere.
Yeah.
Are you sure of that? Because when I was a teenager, and, and I, like young people do, I believed in ESP or whatever crazy stuff.
Right.
And there were some people, friends of my father's especially, who were hard-headed types, and they shamed me. And I came pretty quickly, the shame and the it had a powerful effect.
That might work for something like that, but I think if you go after someone's religion, it's going to be different. That is something that they've grown up with. That's something they believe really deeply. I think it will backfire with religion. I agree. Something like that maybe, and also that can even be among friends or something like that. But that wasn't affecting your ESP belief wasn't affecting your belief in the afterlife, where grandma was going to go after she died. And so so that's actually much deeper. So I actually would stand by that. Yeah.
So can you talk to a little bit of, when I talk to people about evolution, especially believers, I try and focus on the medical side of things.
Yes.
And I've told them that basically evolution and natural selection weren't absolute fact, then you couldn't go to the hospital and be treated for viral, bacterial
Right.
Can you talk to a little bit to that?
Yeah, no, in fact, actually, this is the end. I actually haven't gotten to the lecture part. But, no, I wanted to break it up a little bit. But so, yeah, definitely, I think that the examples of bacterial resistance is a good one. Of course, they'll go, oh, but that's microevolution. And so I think you're not going to get too far with just those simple examples, and that's why I actually like cancer. Because cancer, you can actually approach it from both an understanding of how we evolved to not get cancer, but also how cancer is evolution within our bodies. But I think that HIV is another very good example that you can use in terms of the development of drug resistance. And those are great examples, but also just our whole understanding of our physiology, our whole understanding of medicine in general, beyond just the resistance, is predicated on this understanding of our similarities with other animals. I mean, for example, the only reason that we can do studies in mice and that they're relevant for humans is because we have the common ancestor that means our basic physiology is incredibly similar. Yeah.
The anti-vaccine hype.
Yeah.
Crap gets on the internet and it goes viral.
Right.
How do you...
A lot of crap gets on the internet, right?
Right. How do you...
I mean, I think, again, it's something where just a lot of people haven't thought too much about it. And the more we talk about it, the more people will respond when someone writes. I mean, there have been letters to the editor within the last 2 months on vaccines, for example. And I think the more we're on top of it, and the more people are willing to say, no, that's not true, then that's about the best we can do. But yes, there's crap on the internet about, I mean, you name it, right?
Right. The Earth is flat. Over here.
Right.
See that?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I'm a geologist, and it's like when I was in the oil business in the 80s in Texas, I had all my geologist friends from different universities, and I was getting some civil engineering credits at the University of Texas. The international college, my friends were like Faraz Kablawi, who was a Palestinian, Kuwaitan, Muslim, and I had all different types of friends, and I'd sit around there, and I've been an atheist since I was 16, and I'm pretty old. And so it's basically when you're dealing with educated people, it's a little bit different. Also, the Denver Post had a really good. They put an insert in from our National Federal Museum that had Neanderthal and the Cro-Magnon and explained it for like children type of thing. It was a 2-page insert. I thought that was pretty good. Plus, there's been a lot of movies on the make with Walking Through Time, where this guy did the DNA and he did all the DNA from all the different people. And he coordinated the guys going into the Aborigines going to Australia and then coming back out and then coming back in, and he got all our DNA from this one group in Africa. I mean, there's the apes like Rosa and Coco and those documentaries. There's a lot of things really going on, and all you got to do is present them to the public.
Right.
Also basically being in the oil business, that's what you do. You go in there. It's like, for instance, Dr. Darby. I took a graduate level petroleum class from him, and he was there into micro fossils. Because the drill bits screw up the big fossils.
Right.
And so if you looked at a paleontology microfossil, you're going to find the book is about like that thick.
Right.
And basically, it's like that's what your oil industry does. I mean, during the Cretaceous in Texas, the seas came in, the seas went out.
That's true. I think that's a good point. That geology is also quite dependent on.
So also in your during the 1.1 billion years ago, you had this type of algae, this green algae, and it would take you had a sulfide type of ocean, and so it would do iron sulfide, and so they would take the iron sulfide and they would basically put the iron as a deposit underneath the sulfide. And so that's why you have the huge iron deposits. I graduated from the University of Minnesota. I went to Colorado School.
No, I think I get your point.
But it's like basically in our economic, mineral economics and everything in our life is how you use it. And it's like, it's not that hard to do it. Now I took a logic course at the University of Texas.
I still got the other half. Let me get through this other half.
Can I just say this one right here?
No.
She sat there and she sat there and
Excuse us.
No, yeah, I think a good point is that actually, if someone's a young Earth creationist, they're not just violating what we know about biology. They're violating geology. They're violating what we know about astrology. One letter. And probably several of the fields of science. But anyway, so let's move on to the next part. Okay, so now, and again, please keep interrupting me during this. All right, next slide. So I'm going to go into, this is actually, my lab actually used to study things from a much more basic perspective, but we really were down at the cellular level. We were looking at understanding how genes were expressed at a very basic level, at a molecular level, at a very reductionist level. And actually, in some ways, I can credit my venture into this area to Kansas creationists, because I think it was about 13 years ago, back when my kids were in elementary school, that they were, the school board in Kansas changed the rules so that, I forget whether they were putting intelligent design into the textbooks or something like that. But they ended up all getting voted out. But when this happened, I basically, for the first time, I sort of woke up to this problem and decided I was going to go into my kids' schools and teach some evolutionary biology, which I did. And the bad thing is that these first and third graders actually asked really good questions. And I realized I didn't understand evolutionary biology as well as I thought I did, so I started reading up a lot more. And as I read up more, I realized it pertained to my research much more than I thought it had. So that actually led to all these studies. So I should actually put the Kansas creationists in my credit slide. So the title of this is How Cancer Shapes Evolution and How Evolution Shapes Cancer. All right, so we'll start with a quote from Theodosius Dobzhansky. He was a fantastic evolutionary biologist and actually was a Christian as well, but was a great spokesman for evolutionary biology. And he said that nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution, so one forward. And I would argue that nothing in cancer biology makes sense. All right, go forward. So the way we're taught about cancer is that people have thought for at least 30 years that cancer in some ways is an evolutionary disease happening within us, and that arises by clonal selection. And so I'm going to try to go light on the science terms. I know you guys are probably a pretty savvy audience, but if I say something you don't understand, please stop me. But basically the idea is that you get an initiating mutation, and that this is a cancer-promoting mutation. We would call it an oncogenic mutation, and this gives the cell some advantage. It's considered adaptive, which now allows for a second mutation, another clonal selection, and so forth. And the problem I have with this approach is that it's very mutation-centric. So basically, the credit for evolution is given to the mutations. And really, it's the mutations that provide the selective advantage. And you notice that all these boring little white circles don't seem to be playing much of a role. But we'll move on. So let's go on to the next slide.
On what level are we talking at that point?
That's at the cellular level. So this is at level...
Subnuclear?
No, the mutation's obviously happening in a gene in the nucleus. But those are...
No, I mean, I'm not disagreeing with him.
Right.
Trying to be more clear.
Yeah.
Are you talking cells?
Those are cells.
DNA?
Yeah, go back one.
Okay, just
so these are representing cells.
Okay.
And I'm not showing the nuclear structure. And this is meant to be one mutation, so forth and so on. Right?
Thank you.
Okay. No, absolutely. Please ask for clarification. Go in. So, but if we think about the evolution of species, and I won't get into the controversy surrounding species and stuff like that, but we know that it's largely driven by environmental change. And so evolution, a lot of people like to think of evolution as progressive, but it really isn't progressive. It's responding to environmental change, because once an animal population or even a plant population becomes adapted to the current environment, they don't tend to change much. In fact, it's been known for almost a century now as stabilizing selection. So change tends to be disadvantageous within a very well-adapted population. But when the environment drastically changes, when the dinosaurs had their oh shit moment when the giant meteor hit off the Yucatan or whatever it was that caused the extinction 65 million years ago, that largely drove a change in selective pressures. It really doubtfully changed mutation rates. You can certainly imagine that during some of the other major extinction events, such as just changes in the level of the seas, it really is doubtful that there's much change in mutation. It's really acting on the variation that was already present to then select for new, basically adaptive traits that would allow for better survival within this new environment. And of course, there's actually a pretty big component of drift that often gets ignored. But we won't be getting into that. So go forward. And yet the way people currently think about cancer, and this is the current dogma within the cancer field, is that if you think about what causes cancer, the number one cause of cancer is aging. far and beyond anything else. I'll get into that more in a minute, but obviously there's things like smoking, other carcinogens and so forth. The belief is that the major driver is the mutations. So if you ask someone, why does smoking cause cancer, they'll tell you because it's causing mutations within your lung cells. And that this is driving cancer, and they give very little attention to the actual alterations in selection. And they give basically almost no attention to the drift. And yet drift actually probably plays a role in cancer as well. So go forward. And so this is the idea that my lab's been toying around with for about a decade. And we call it adaptive oncogenesis. And basically we argue that these changes in the environment, the microenvironment of the tissue, I mean, for example, I don't need to convince you that a smoker's lung does not prevent the same environment for selection that a non-smoker's lung would present. And an aged tissue is just structurally different and actually presents a different environment for the cells within that tissue. And that these are driving a change in selection. And then the change in mutation frequency is actually a relatively minor player in this. It's still a player, but a minor player. And actually drift probably plays a significant role. And that we think this is likely driving cancer. And I'll get into this a little more as I go forward. Okay, go to the next one. So the first thing you have to appreciate is that different mammals have similar rates of cancer incidence with respect to lifespan. And so if this is the potential lifespan of a mouse or a human, and I say potential because actually you'd be hard-pressed to find a mouse over 6 months old in the wild. They have a, breed early, breed often strategy because they're likely to end with an early demise. You can imagine mice have about 8 to 10 pups with every litter. And they can have a litter every few weeks. If they weren't mostly dying, this room would be filled up in no time with mice. So it's one of those great examples that Malthus had used, except to an extreme. And so 1.5 years is about when mice in the lab will start getting cancer. So you can ask yourself, is cancer a big problem for a mouse in the wild? Not really. No. Cold, hunger, cats, those sorts of things are the big problem. And for humans as well. So we tend to start getting cancer after we're about 40 or so, depending on the cancer. And then there's an exponential increase with age for most cancers. And of course, actually for most of our evolutionary history, the natural selection acts upon a population when it is likely to be important for passing its genes on to the next generation. And I think we need to start thinking about this from the perspective of cancer. So if you move to the next one. So I like to think of it also in terms of economics. So evolution, just like economics, understands that resources are limited, that one makes wise investments, and I shouldn't be anthropomorphizing evolution, I know that, but I'm doing it anyway. So, and it maximizes the return on investment. So, move forward. So I think now if we start to think about cancer in the context of a natural lifespan, things make a little more sense. So when I say percent alive in the wild, I'm drawing a rough curve. It's obviously going to vary a lot for different animals. Some animals have a very high, infant mortality rate, but basically the animals will tend to have a better survival rate during the time where they're likely to pass their genes on to the next generation. And this would be the typical reproductive period. And there tends to be relatively little overlap with the cancer incidence curve. So go forward once. And so the first thing we have to understand is the evolution of long-lived multicellular animals required selection for potent tumor suppressive mechanisms. But these mechanisms would need to act during this period. And next button, there'd be minimal selection against cancer beyond the age where most animals would already be dead by other causes. So, and finally, the last point, and you can imagine you could get better tumor suppression. You could select for better tumor suppression. But that would come with an energy cost early in life. And if you're a mouse, actually, most people would be surprised, the #1 cause of death of mice is not cats. It's cold. It's an energy problem. They basically aren't getting enough sustenance to keep up their metabolism to the point that they can maintain their body temperature. So freezing is the big problem that you face as a mouse. And so if you were investing more in tumor suppression or any other anti-aging mechanism so you could push this curve out to the right, that would come with a cost that would probably make you less competitive with your peers. In fact, it wouldn't just probably make you, it would make you less competitive because we already know that mice have evolved a certain sort of balance between tumor suppression and vitality. Yeah?
How does that curve look when you match it up with a creature that invests more time in a social structure where actually there's benefits to having older members of a social group
Right.
take.
And that may be why humans have pushed their curve out as far as they have. I mean, it's hard to make the comparison because you'd have to have two similarly aged species where you could compare the two. I mean, we're two similar species where one was less structural and social than the other, and I'm not sure such a comparison's been done. But I think you can look at very similar. There's a great example of these opossums of Virginia. And they're the mainland opossums, and then there are these island opossums. The island opossums have been isolated for only about 5,000 years. For a mammal, this is a blink of the eye evolutionarily. And yet they age about 50% slower than the mainland opossums. And you might think, well, why is this? And it's because the island ones don't have to deal with predators like coyotes. And so they're basically more likely to have offspring in their second and third years that survive their adulthood. And so basically there's been an investment in maintaining their tissues for longer because there's a payoff. So it's one of those great examples because it says that the tuning of these mechanisms isn't that hard to change. You can imagine if opossums could change it in 5,000 years, that's probably not a lot of genetic change. And there are other examples, like if you just look among rodents, for example, rodents that live underground, like moles, tend to live much longer than rodents that live above ground because they have less of a problem. They have fewer external hazards. So there are a lot of examples like that. All right, so we'll move forward. So what are some of these evolved mechanisms? Well, the ones that most people know about, so these are not my ideas, are that there's good DNA repair. But it's interesting, actually, we're no better than yeast or other single-cell organisms at repairing our DNA. So if avoiding the mutations was the way to keep from getting cancer, then that's not what the evolution of multicellularity that's not the direction it's taken us. Hey, she told me she was going to leave. She's not insulted. That we have effective responses to damage in oncogenes. So, for example, our cells can commit suicide if they get a certain amount of damage, stuff like that. So we have mechanisms. Go forward. And this is one I really like. This is an integral mechanism. Again, this has been postulated by others for many years. And this is this hierarchical tissue organization. We may have, trillions of cells in our body, but not all of them are capable of getting cancer. And so, for example, within our gut, where our gut is maintained, we're shedding billions of cells every day into our gut. But it's maintained by a relatively small number of stem cells. And these stem cells represent well under 1,000th of the cells in the gut. So right there, it's a small target because these are the ones that have the potential to be transformed because they live a long time. But then they make these other cells that divide a lot and make all the actual cells that function as gut cells. But these cells basically are almost put on a conveyor belt where everyone knows the little villi that flop into your intestine and are used to absorb nutrients. Well, those cells are just moving up to the tip and getting shed off. So it's really a beautiful mechanism, basically, because even if a cell along the way got a potentially cancer-causing mutation, no harm done because it's going to be crapped out within a few days. and so it's an evolved mechanism. So in some ways, this is why I like to think about things from an evolutionary perspective, because I don't think you can understand the structure of the gut without understanding not just how it evolved to be a good food-absorbing organ, but how that evolution, how the whole tissue structure was compatible with low enough cancer incidence to allow us to make it through our breeding age. So we don't tend to get colon cancer till we're much older. And so I think it's a great example. Go for it. And so of course there's immunity, which I won't get into because that'd be a whole nother hour. And then the concept that we've been developing, which is self-fitness. And I'll get more into that. So what do I mean by self-fitness? I'm really using the same definition that you would use for animals, bacteria, plants. And basically it's a measure of the ability of but in this case a stem or progenitor cell, of a certain genotype, but I'm also including epigenotype because we know that, I won't get into it, to pass this type on to subsequent cell generations. So you can imagine if the black and the blue cells have equal fitness, then over time they're going to equally contribute. So this could be the same thing for rabbits as for cells, right? But if the white cells had decreased fitness, oh yeah, that'd be great, thank you. If the white cells have decreased fitness, they're going to be basically lost from the population over time. All right, go for it. So the basic model that we've developed is that high stem cell fitness can mediate tumor suppression. And basically this provides for healthy competition and good fitness, just like within an animal population, prevents adaptive evolution by favoring the status quo. Remember I mentioned that an animal population that's well adapted to its environment doesn't tend to change. This has been, I think Fisher was one of the first people, like 1930s, to come up with this idea. But we think basically the same thing is happening in ourselves. So when I spoke about that investment when we were young in the tissues, that investment is in maintaining good structure. Maintaining good structure and good fitness, because basically it favors the status quo. Change will not be beneficial, typically. So go forward. So this is, again, going back to the conventional view. This is how most cancer biologists would still view cancer, and that's that the cancer-causing event, the oncogenic event, will improve cellular fitness. And thus cancer is limited by the oncogenic event, because this provides an automatic advantage, and that's going to cause that cell expansion that I showed earlier. Go forward. And of course the answer is no, but you go forward more. And so this is our view. It's that oncogenic events in a healthy progenitor pool will typically reduce the fitness of the cell. And this is because the cell is already well adapted. It likes things the way it is. Move forward. But in the context of a damaged pool, and this could be an aged pool, this could be lung cells of a smoker, that now the fitness of these cells is reduced because either the cell itself has acquired damage, or perhaps even more likely, the environment around the cell, that tissue environment, is no longer normal. And so now you can provide an opportunity, room for improvement basically, for an oncogenic event. So what I'm arguing is that the healthy progenitor pool evolved this fitness to prevent this from happening, prevent it from being advantageous. But contexts that either we didn't evolve to deal with, like smoking, or that basically are beyond the purview of natural selection, like old age, basically can allow for this adaptation to occur. Go forward. So high stem cell fitness, and these are this is known as adaptive or fitness landscapes, and used by evolutionary biologists. And so they would refer to a population of animals that's well adapted to its environment as being somewhere upon some fitness peak. And even if there was some other fitness peak that might provide a better way of being adapted, a better solution to that environment, getting there would mean traversing through low fitness valleys, and basically at that point you'd be outcompeted by your peers, so getting there is difficult. And so we think this is what's happening when we're young and healthy. Our stem cell pools have this high fitness. And thus, even if there's a malignant genotype, even if there was some cancer solution that's at a higher peak, it's hard to get there. And so this XY axis, I should mention, is all the possible phenotypes, all the traits, basically. Okay, go forward. So this is a good example of youth. These are two healthy, young-looking individuals. Go forward one. But what a drag it is getting old. And I admit that this is not a controlled experiment, because there's probably chemical exposures involved. But this brings up the point is that it's quite obvious, and those of us over 40 are painfully aware of it. I'm a basketball player, and every time, I used to when I was 20, I'd hurt my knee. I'd be back a few days later playing basketball, and now I'm out for weeks, right? So our ability to regenerate our tissue, our ability to maintain normal tissue structure decreases as we age. And essentially this is because evolution has favored a certain investment in tissue maintenance to the point that it was most advantageous for us as a population. All right, go forward. And so this is basically the way the adaptive landscape might look in an elderly individual. Or smoker's lung, or anything of that sort, right? And so now the wild-type genotype, it's still on some sort of peak, but it's not nearly as fit, it's not nearly as well adapted to this new environment. You can also imagine this new tissue, like a smoker's lung, for example, is probably creating new peaks of potential adaptation. And it doesn't mean that this pathway over to the malignant genotypes is a given, because even all smokers don't get lung cancer, but it basically makes that pathway easier. It basically lowers that energy or that potential to basically have these changes become advantageous. Does that make sense?
So when you say the age or the smoking is basically lowering the bar for what's considered advantageous.
Right. It'd be just like basically, you can imagine that the populations that were present on the Earth a little before 65 million years ago were relatively well adapted to the environment that was there. And that environment changed if it had been a meteor or whatever it was, right? And so that new environment presents new opportunities for adaptation. But you're right, it lowered the fitness of the animals that were there, because now they were no longer adapted to this new environment. And that's essentially, and on top of that, there's probably some accumulation of damage within the cells themselves. So there's probably part of it that's within the cell, but I think in any larger measure, it's the overall tissue environment.
On plants, they rot.
Yes.
Don't humans just go through a point where they rot?
Well,
and we call it cancer?
I wouldn't go, I mean, of course we do rot when we die, yes.
Okay, now, so when we die, then we, okay, so when the plant dies, it rots?
Yeah, I would say yeah, because then it's basically being, it's microbial communities or whatever else, small insects eat it up.
Okay, and that's why I'm asking, okay, if you want to solve cancer, is that just trying to solve rotting?
No, I would say this is quite different,
good,
yeah.
Totally different.
Yeah.
So cancer is a function of the living that we're trying to solve to extend longevity?
I mean, certainly to not necessarily extend the length of life, but to make life better while we can live it.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Anything else?
Oh, so we're going to die whether we have cancer or not.
Yeah, I'm not a believer that I'm not a believer that we could ever live forever, right?
Why not? Is there a reason why we have to die?
Well, I think basically, I think we're fighting too much evolution. I mean, I think we're fighting too long. We have not been selected to live beyond a certain point. Now, but the opossum example I gave you does give me some hope. Because if an opossum within 5,000 years could tweak mechanisms to increase lifespan 50%, I mean, that'd be basically going from about 75 to 125 years. Well, no, that's bad math, but 80 to 120. Let me go with a simple example.
Okay.
But,
I'm coming from the perspective of theism, atheism.
Right.
Theists are literally programming their people to die, when ultimately there is no reason to die. I mean, literally,
I'm
if
not
you
sure I
think about
get you on that one.
Okay, theists are trying to, you got to go to heaven at some point.
Right.
Okay? What's the point? They're literally programming themselves to die because they think that is inevitable.
Right.
They don't see any reason to live unless you're going to go to heaven.
Right.
But ultimately, there is no reason to die. We do, but there's no reason.
Well, I think there's a limit to the machine that we evolved into, and the limit to its capacity. But
And
we'll
that's
find
feeding the same
All right.
theistic. I'll shut up.
All right, got another one.
Quick question, when you're talking about the fitness of cells,
yeah.
And I may be using the wrong terminology, but I keep reading in different magazines about basically the time punch at the ends of genes.
Right, telomeres.
Telomeres,
yeah.
And every time it divides over a certain number
It's
of
like a clock.
iterations, basically the tails of it get clipped off as it goes along.
Right.
How does that play into what you're calling the fitness of the cell, or is that the fitness?
That definitely plays a role in aging. It probably plays a role. It's not clear that it's playing a role necessarily in all stem cell aging. For example, you could take the stem cells that make the blood compartment of a mouse, and you could transfer them through 5 lifetimes of a mouse. They do eventually go through a crisis and end at some point, but they seem to have far greater capacity to, and we know that the stem cells from an old person, they're still functional. It's that they're just not functioning at their same peak capacity. So it's not that they've reached that complete limit. So I think it's playing a role, but I'm not sure it's the full thing. But that definitely, and that's something that cancer has learned has evolved to overcome. So cancers can re-express the enzyme that sticks these little end pieces back onto the chromosomes and allows them to become immortal. So that's how we have immortal cell lines. Cancers truly can become immortal in that sense.
So there's many variables into the definition of the fitness.
Yeah, I think it's a lot more than just the telomere shortening. It's more complicated than that. Did you have a question?
Well, what about, would it be possible then to genetically modify a human not to have cancer?
And on that point, I may have to be a pro-organic, but genetically modify a human, certainly we're not there yet. I actually think that you can't, I don't think there's a way we can prevent the oncogenic mutations from happening. There's too many cells, and we can't really, I think, change our DNA repair mechanism that much. I think evolution would have already done that for us if that was a feasible solution. But I do think we can probably tune maintenance mechanisms. So if we better maintained our tissues longer, then I think we'd be better at avoiding cancer. But in some ways, we already know how to do that. You eat well, you exercise, you do all the things we're supposed to do, don't smoke. And you're going to actually reduce but aging is thus far inevitable. For now. I don't know.
But do cancers live? Do they live forever, or do they have a lifespan?
Yeah, we for example, has people heard about the HeLa cells, the Immortal Henrietta Lacks book that came out recently? So that's a cell line that was created from a woman, and there's ethical issues in terms of how it was created, but it was 40, 50 years ago. And it's so commonly used in biomedical research, they estimate that her body mass has been expanded well over 1 billion times. Just in terms of amount of, so that's truly an example, as far as we can tell, that is a truly immortal cell line. And there are many other cell lines that we've been going on forever with.
But that's outside of a natural setting, so
yes.
in nature, no, cancer doesn't live forever.
No, cancer dies with the host. Actually, no, there's an exception,
okay.
The dog cancers. I don't know if you guys have heard of these canine. This is actually, here's another great example to use to your intelligent design friends. Because if this is intelligent design, then the God has a great sense of humor. So there are these venereal cancers among dogs, and they've been around for thousands of years. They don't know exactly how long, but probably in the order of 3,000 to 5,000 years or so. And basically, it's actually a cancer that's being passed from dog to dog. And it's venereal. And it actually gets passed because during the mating, dogs tend to bite the genitalia of the other dogs. And so it gets passed from dog to dog. And so it somehow managed to, so normally, if you took my cancer and you transferred to anyone else, it would be immediately rejected. The immune system is wonderful. Just like it rejects a transplant, right? It will reject a cancer like that. So passing cancers around is not a problem with humans. But for some reason, this one cancer, because it happened once, had evolved the capacity to escape the immune system long enough to hang around in one dog to be passed to the next dog.
It's the same thing with the Tasmanian devil.
The Tasmanian devil. The dog one's interesting because the dog one's going between coyotes, even foxes, and all kinds of dogs. So there it's an incredibly diverse population of animals. The Tasmanian devils have gone through bottlenecks, so they're incredibly interbred. So part of the reason the Tasmanian devil facial cancers can do this is because there's actually very little genetic variability. So it's like all Tasmanian devils are siblings, kind of, in a simplistic sense. So that's a little different, but it's escaping in there it's actually making the demise of the population. But yeah, so that's a great example of an actual cancer that evolved to basically be its own organism. Because that cancer has been around as a cancer, as that same genetic cancer, I mean it's changing over time, for thousands of years now. If that's intelligent design, go ahead. So, okay, one last little point, and this is the evolution of multicellularity. And again, I'm just going to show you how my thinking differs from a lot of my colleagues. And so actually, this is the sort of controversy that we should be talking about, right? And you know, the ideas that I'm presenting, they're getting published, they're getting out there, but have my ideas taken over? No, and nor should they. I mean, they need to be proven. And so there should be a high hurdle for new ideas, but you have to do it through science. You can't do it through, you know, anyway. So, so this is how a lot of people view the evolution of multicellularity. So we can all think of these selfish single cells, right? So yeast and bacteria, they're always in competition with each other, and they basically act selfishly for their own good, and that keeps the bacterial population fit, because basically only the best survive. And then you have this idea that a lot of scientists have put forth, is that they're basically, when you got multicellularity, the selfless cells in a selfish multicellular organism. So the organism is still selfish, but somehow these cells have surrendered their high fitness. So go forward one. It's sort of the hippie view of things, right? So they're basically functioning in this communal organism for the good of the overall organism. So go forward. So I think this is wrong. So my view is instead that there's this highly fit and competitive tissue cells promote the best, you know, so greed is good, right? So promote the maintenance of the tissue. So in other words, I actually think the high fitness, basically the cells always being in competition with each other, is good for the organism because that helps maintain the fitness of the tissue as a whole. Because any cell that, for whatever reason, loses some of that fitness, because let's say it acquired a mutation, would be eliminated, and so you maintain a larger, better functional organ. So go forward. So that was the other idea. And the other thing I think that these ideas might be useful for is explaining what's been considered a paradox for many years. So it's considered a paradox that animals as small as a mouse through a blue whale seem to have roughly about the same incidence of cancer, and the cancer is always happening in the later part of their potential lifespan, not their actual lifespan, but what they could potentially live for. And so the difference in the number of cells between a mouse and a whale is about on the order of over a million to 10 million. So it's a huge difference. And the whale lives almost 100 years, and the mouse lives 2 years to maybe 3 years in the lab. That's its potential lifespan. So you would think that with so many more stem cells, the target size for cancer must be hugely more in a whale. And also with the longer lifespan, there's more time to accumulate all these mutations. So with the conventional view, this is indeed a paradox. I mean, how can you explain how this guy, or even us with 1,000 times more cells and 20 times as long a lifespan, how we're not getting cancer at a higher rate than mice? So go forward. So basically, the major thing I'd like to convince you of is this ability of a fit stem cell pool to basically impede somatic evolution, to favor the status quo, would be independent of size. Right? A big pool will prevent it. In fact, I'd argue that actually a bigger pool, because it's going to have more buffering capacity, would be even better at preventing it than a smaller pool. So anyway, that's I think the last data slide. Okay, so this is actually the fun part, because here's something I'll talk about that I have absolutely no expertise in. So I have no religious training, and I'm certainly not a sociologist, but I just thought about this would be fun to kind of end on. So, can we have religion without God? And I'm obviously using the term religion kind of loosely. So the first question is, why have all societies developed religion? And all may be an exaggeration. I think there's been some occasional societies that don't have religion, but virtually all societies have religion. So then the second question, well, what adaptive purpose does religion serve? Both in a positive and a negative sense. And I'd like to focus on the positive. I think there's clear negatives. I think a lot of the tribalism, and again, no training at all, this is just my own thoughts. A lot of the tribalism is fostered by religion, and that could be good for a small society. It could get you to do things that you might not normally do. But, so what are some of the positive attributes of a religious organization? And actually, it's funny because this was mentioned earlier. Fostering community, charitable programs, advocacy, helping each other out. So these are good things. But can a group like the Secular Hub promote some of these positive attributes without the need for beliefs in the supernatural? So I end on that.
Yes.
Yes. I already have to.
Could you substitute the word religion for sports?
You probably could, yeah. So have we evolved a need for sports, basically? I mean, I certainly like sports. Yeah, that's an interesting, I mean, it's true. All societies, all civilizations have had sports. Right. Yeah. Yeah. And you can do that without God. Yeah.
One of the main points you made late in the talk was that the self-fitness thing means that cells have to compete hard against other cells in the same organism,
right,
as opposed to being competes in a
right, exactly.
But there are two ways to compete. One way is to produce a better product and have your clients give you benefits, and therefore the other way is to just kill off your people you're competing against. Do they do both of these things?
I think the killing off the other cells is there are cases where cancer cells can actually eliminate other cells late in the cancer evolution. So there can be both positives and negatives. So part of the way a cancer can eventually win is by killing off the other cells. In some ways, I'm not sure, it's not like the cancer is, obviously the cancer is not thinking of this strategy, but the cancer evolves to a context where there's very limited blood supply. And so the cancer goes to a different mechanism of metabolism, and that mechanism produces a lot more lactic acid. That's the same stuff that burns your muscles when you exercise, but it's very acidic. And so it actually creates a very acidic environment, and then that'll force the cancer cell to evolve to that acidic environment, but it also provides an added benefit that that acidic environment can kill off some of the normal cells. And so as the cancer evolves, I think those strategies come into play. It's not so clear that that's the case with the normal cells in terms of maintaining their fitness, that they're actually doing it where they try to eliminate each other. Now that might be an attribute that the organism would evolve a way around, because that wouldn't be good for the tissue. Right. So maybe there still are, there's competition, but under a certain set of rules. Yeah, in the back.
You talked about your interest in astrology earlier on. I'd like to hear what you think the future holds for evolution in the human species, and whether developments with humanity and civilization, genetic science, change in procreation, welfare state are going to change evolution in us.
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously, we are still evolving. And in fact, it's funny because people often think humans haven't evolved. I mean, we probably evolved more in the last 10,000 years than the preceding, certainly than the preceding 10 or the preceding 20 or 30. And the reason simply is the development of agriculture. So we've now exposed ourselves to pathogens. So a lot of our evolution, I think, is happening not to the point that we're going to, grow extra arms and stuff like that, but it's happening, for example, in our immune system. And so we evolved in the last 10,000 years to deal with the fact that a lot of the common viruses nowadays are actually derived from domesticated animals. And our exposure to that has changed us. And also because of agriculture, we're living in big groups now. So we're exposed to diseases that are entirely different than the diseases we were encountering as hunter-gatherers. So that's really forced a major change. And so they've looked at the evolution of genes, and genes in the immune system have evolved more in recent time than most other tissues would evolve. The other tissue that has evolved a lot is the neural system as well. So I think there's still evolution. And another example of that is HIV in Africa. It's having such a vast toll that you probably are going to start selecting for genotypes that are more resistant to HIV over there. And that's actually, I think, so within the United States, where our survival is so good now and infant mortality is so low, I think that within this country there's probably little selection happening for change. In fact, if anything, we may, because we're compassionate people, now we give, if someone is born with type 1 diabetes, we give them insulin. Before, they would have died and not passed on those genes to the next generation. But now we're, and I'm not saying we change this, but so we are going to change the genetic makeup of our population by our policies. Supplementing our diet with folate is changing genetics. Because it used to be certain genotypes would die during development because they didn't tolerate the low folate, not having enough folate. And now those genotypes, does everyone know what I mean by genotypes? The makeup of our genes are able to be born. So yeah, we are changing our genetic makeup. And in part it's because we have policies that are good. So I wouldn't want to change it, but that's true. That was a long-winded answer. Yeah.
Wouldn't you agree that the lifespan of Americans is the worst in the industrialized nation, among industrialized nations? And wouldn't looking at other nations that vastly outlive us be a lesson in something genetic in addition to pollution control?
It's probably more healthcare policy than anything else, but that's certainly outside my realm of expertise. But yeah, I imagine that's probably healthcare policy. It's probably the way we live our lives. I don't know.
You're talking about things that kill you after you're done reproducing. So natural selection has a real hard time changing anything like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you think there are decent parallels between the evolution of social behavior in social species and the evolution of multicellularity in cells getting along?
Yeah, I don't know how well I could address that one. In terms of the evolution of social behavior, I mean, it's certainly been the case that, humans have actually gone through, for probably over 1 million years now, we've been actually passing down social behaviors. Right. And these have spread wonderfully well, everything from the use of tools and beyond. And so that's a different level of evolution.
Well, I wasn't going necessarily that far. You can talk about bees and herds, and there's all kinds of social behavior where individuals in a population, yeah, there's competition within the population, but there's also cooperation. And is there a similar dynamic, perhaps, but on a lower level between cells within an organism?
Well, certainly our whole bodies are not simply a massive competition of cells. I hope it didn't give that impression. Clearly we have, for example, none of our cells could be working without the fact that we're making red blood cells to deliver oxygen to all of them, right? So there's clearly a ton of cooperativity working within our body. Right. But I'm saying cells of the same type are in competition with each other. And this has been shown by making chimeric animals. So you basically take cells of different types and you put them together, and you can see that they basically compete with each other.
Right, but would that be like competition between people who have the same job trying to get a job type thing? Or
yeah, in some ways that may be, so you can imagine within a factory, and you have all these workers doing different jobs. And maybe the guy over there putting the steering wheel into the car is not competing with the guy putting wheels on. but the guys making the wheels are in competition with each other. So I definitely think within your body, the cells are only competing with like cells.
I see.
But otherwise, there's a ton of cooperativity. You know, obviously, the whole organism is working because it works together. Yeah.
Do any transgenic transformations and manipulations concern you?
What do you mean by transgenic?
Well, when Monsanto comes along and builds super corn or whatever to resist or to work with pesticides that they also sell, those can enter the food chain.
Well, they do. We eat it, yeah.
And we eat that. Are any of those of concern to you?
I think the evidence has been quite strong that those are safe, and actually that they're safe. So like the Roundup resistant corn and stuff like that. Basically, it's allowing you to use less pesticides because the pesticide they're using, the Roundup, is highly biodegradable, not damaging to humans, from what they've been able to tell. So I see it as improvement. But probably another
consumption, but we don't know how it will affect the overall sustainability of natural systems.
I don't think there's been evidence that it's negatively impacting it. And that's again where I'd say I think we should make that argument on the basis of the science that's been done. You know, and yeah, if you go to Greenpeace's website, you'll read different stuff. But
have you seen a reduction in their effectiveness?
Yeah, that's right. He's coming to. I'm sorry.
Have you seen or noticed a reduction in their effectiveness?
Which?
The plants that are bred to be Roundup compliant and their ability to...
I think we're going outside my area of expertise. All right.
Well, let's give a big hand. So wasn't this awesome?
Yeah.
All these people there, and just in case you thought we were kidding about wanting ideas, I ended up writing 20 of them down while I was standing there. So you have ideas about ways to make things better, let one of us know, and we'll see what we can do. And I really appreciate all of you coming out today. This is what will keep the hub alive, and
we're thrilled to have everybody here.
Yeah, keep us evolving.
Stick around and have drink a little bit. There is a bar and restaurant across the street if anybody needs some alcohol.
DeGregori, I think Charles Darwin would be delighted you were here speaking on evolution tonight, on his birthday. I also want to point out that we have some books over here. A lot of them are scientific books on evolution that Becky has put together, so if you want to take a look at those, we'd love to have you pick one of those up. Tom Kellogg from the Boulder Atheist Group brought down some flyers that he'd like you to pick up. Richard Dawkins is coming to Denver. You probably heard that. And so come and pick those up. And I hope you remember this night as a night when maybe grassroots secularism took hold in Colorado. Yay! Yeah. Enjoy yourselves. If you want to get on our email list, please fill out one of these forms and we'll see what's happening.